Good morning, friends. Pastor Brett here, and I'm excited to go over the common thread this week with you. So as we look at these four passages, the theme that immediately jumped out to me was the idea of the comparison that was being made between the things that distract us, the things that call for our attention and call and have this appearance of significance here on earth, versus the things of God that calls for our attention and our time and our effort and our energy. So in the book of Jonah, for example, you see Jonah come to the Ninevites and he declares this message to them, and they respond. It says that from the greatest of them to the least, they responded such that they were in public mourning. They put on sackcloth and ashes, this sign of public shame and distress. And the final verse that we read tells us that God heard their cry, that he relented and did not destroy the city as he had planned. Well, the book of Psalms, the psalmist is reflecting on this thing, and he talks about in verses 9 and 10, he talks about the idea that if you become wealthy, not to let your wealth distract you from God, because God is the one who's important. That his work, his kingdom, his plans, that's what matters. And there's a lot of other things in life, but not to let those pull you away. The book of 1 Corinthians, Paul is admonishing the Corinthian church in the same way, and he tells them that because of the closeness of God's kingdom, because of the work that God is doing, that they should live in a different way. That the things that are important, that are what would define their lives, their jobs and their families and spouses and this sort of thing, he says those have to take a back seat to the work of God. Now, we can dive into more about what exactly it looks like and how we do that, because we also have, for example, Paul guiding these early church leaders and telling them that husbands that won't take care of their families shouldn't be considered for leadership. So I don't think that this is an admonition to abandon your family or to be irresponsible, but it's a comparison thing. So similarly, we have the book of Mark describing these men who heard the call of God through his son, Jesus Christ, and took that very seriously, abandoning their jobs, leaving uncertainty. And there will come a time, I believe the story is recorded in the book of John, when Jesus tells the disciples about how anyone who has given up something for the kingdom will be rewarded. And Peter says, Jesus, we've given up everything to follow you. What about us? Are we going to be rewarded for that? And so there's an acknowledgement that these men gave up a great deal to follow Jesus. That they sacrificed a lot, and their example is being held out in this theme, in these set of passages, as one that is worth emulating. Now, Jesus isn't walking around calling people to drop their jobs and follow him on foot anymore, but he's still calling people to follow him. So all of these passages share this idea in common, this choice to sacrifice the material, to sacrifice comfort, to sacrifice our attention on these things that have sort of an immediate benefit for the long-term spiritual benefits, to see God's kingdom work and grow, to see the Spirit enact change in our lives in powerful ways, and to see rewards that are more permanent and long-lasting. But this is all pretty vague and intangible stuff, and so we're left with kind of this larger question: what does that look like for us? How do we do that? So I want to kind of unpack this a little bit, and this isn't drawn directly from these scriptures necessarily. This is more just kind of an answer to that question. As you're trying to apply this to your life, well, what does that look like? So I think one thing you got to look at is that each of these stories describes it in a different way. So in the book of Jonah, you see Nineveh, who stood opposed to God. They were far from, they didn't know about him, they had nothing to do with him. And when there's the call, then you respond as best you know how. The psalmist, for example, was someone who was familiar, acquainted with God, possibly wealthy. He talks about not letting wealth distract you, so probably was well off. And yet still, the call of God is got to go deeper than the material comforts that you have. The Corinthians were trying to figure out what it meant to follow God in the middle of a culture that didn't support that. And Paul's answer was that you've got to prioritize things of the Spirit. You've got to look different than the world around you. And the early disciples, of course, were believers in the same way that Jesus was. They were Jews. They knew who God was and they believed in him, but they were maybe expecting a work of God. And when the work of God came, they were ready to follow. So what you do with this depends on where you are. If you are just not really interested in it, you're just checking out church, or you saw the video and you're stopping in or whatever, then the call of God in your life is maybe you're not used to hearing God's voice. You don't know what it sounds like. You're not sure what his call might be. And the good news is God is full of grace. He wants to meet with you. And you just respond the best way that you know how. You can come and talk to me or Pastor Tony or Pastor Andy. But a response, something, effort, an attempt to reach out. God is near to those who want to seek him and find him. If you are like the psalmist, someone who's been a believer for a long time, and you are not sure what the call of God is in your life, and you say, well, maybe I'm too old. God doesn't call me that way anymore. Or you say, maybe, I know him well enough now that that's not a thing anymore. And I'm going to tell you that that's not the case. That the call of God on your life will always be to come closer, to go deeper, to know him better. And so I encourage you to explore something that you haven't done before, to pick a new type of prayer, a new way to pray, a new place to pray, to change your rhythms, to explore new ideas, to learn about historic spiritual disciplines. There's a wealth of things that you can delve into in order to uncover this. It looks like I'm having a little trouble here. I see the video froze. I'm going to hope that this is going to keep going and it'll catch back up. So if you are like the Corinthian church, that you've been a believer for a little while now, but you're not sure what's next, well, my advice to you is similar to that of those who have been a believer for a long time, to seek new avenues, to explore, to try something, to learn about something new. And finally, if you are like the disciples, that you are expecting something, then I encourage you especially to devote yourself to prayer, that God is going to do a work, but he'll do it in his own time. But the encouragement for all of us is to see that God is working, that he is calling us, and to try and discern how best to respond. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.